Okay, Jim.
Okay, thanks. I hope you enjoyed that presentation. Sure makes you proud of where we live, and we're lucky to be here. I welcome to you all to our January meeting of the Probus Club of Burlington, our 8th virtual meeting initiated by this COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm your president, Jim Annis. On behalf of our executive, I hope you had as joyous a holiday season as possible and hope to look forward to a safe, healthy, and happy new year. And we continue to focus on our blessings. I want to thank all of those members who send me stories to share with you at these meetings. And unfortunately, I can only share those that are non religious, non political, and relatively clean. But here is one of them. A young man named John received a parrot as a gift. The parrot had a bad attitude and an even worse vocabulary. Every word out of the bird's mouth was rude, obnoxious, and laced with profanity. John tried and tried to change the bird's attitude by consistently saying only polite words, playing soft music, and anything else he could think of to clean up the bird's vocabulary. Finally, John was fed up and yelled at the parrot. The parrot yelled back. John shook the parrot, and the parrot got angrier and even more rude. John, in desperation, threw up his hand, grabbed the bird, and put him in the freezer. For a few minutes, the parrot squawked and kicked and screamed. Then suddenly there was total quiet. Not a peep was heard for over a minute. Fearing that he had hurt the parrot, John quickly opened the door to the freezer. The parrot calmly stepped out onto John's outstretched arms and said, "I believe I may have offended you with my rude language and actions. I'm sincerely remorseful for my inappropriate transgressions, and I fully intend to do everything I can to correct my rude and unforgivable behavior." John was stunned at the change of the bird's attitude. As he was about to ask the bird what had made such a dramatic change in his behavior, the bird spoke up very softly and said, "May I ask what the turkey did?" Oh, I see one smile. I have a number of announcements before we get to our guest speaker today, and they're mostly administrative in kind. I want to welcome a guest today, Ken Merland, to our meeting. Ken, if you wave your hand for us, we'll give you a virtual welcome. We've been informed that one member, Bob Hawken, who is ill and unable to attend today's meeting. And sadly, one of our former members, Austin Knowlton, passed away in December. Austin was an engineer by profession and a serial volunteer, and he was a 19-year member of our club and served on our executive team. All will miss him. I ask for a moment of silence to remember Austin Knowlton, and may his memory be eternal. Thank you. Once again, we want to share our recent monthly meeting attendance and YouTube channel viewings. You can see from the slide that we have, on a combined basis, done very well, and our executive group is thankful for your continuing interest and for your attendance. And we believe that the meetings have had interesting speakers with stimulating presentations in a safe environment. Unfortunately, you need to make your own coffee for these meetings. We would certainly like to have more attendance, and if you can reach out to other members in your acquaintance, please see what you can do to entice them to tune in to our upcoming meetings. And many thanks to Bob Dickinson again for assembling this interesting information, and we'll try to update you throughout the year with our viewership. and attendance. By now, you should be aware that the 2021 membership fees are only $20 and are now due. Stan Rogers, can you hear this? As of January 15th, we had received these fees from 86 of our members out of 146, or almost 60%, and we thank each one of them for your quick and positive response. You can see that you can renew by sending a check or by convenient e-transfers. If you've had a change of address or other changes, we'd also like to hear about that. Simply log on to our Probus website and send us an email or phone one of the executive members. We need to keep your coordinates and other information up to date so that we can contact you. I'm pleased to inform you that our executive have decided that our annual general meeting, or AGM, will be held at our upcoming March meeting this year on March the 18th. All members will receive notice of meeting along with the other appropriate and exciting information, including slate of officers and executive committee members for the 21-22 year, as well as the audited financial statements. I remind everyone that past President Ed Eves is contacting members who are willing to give of their time on the executive team of your club for the ensuing year. And as you know, Ed is relentless in his pursuit. Once again, I urge each one of you to consider how you might give of your time and talents, experience, and energy to help guide your club. And lastly, your executive team will be conducting a phone campaign later this month to contact those members who have not logged on to our Zoom meetings, and if assistance is needed. We will also contact those who have yet to remit their 21 fees. We also welcome any of your comments and suggestions at any time and through these phone meetings. I'm now going to turn the meeting over to our chairman of the Speakers Committee, Kevin Harrar, to introduce our guest speaker this morning. Kevin, unmute yourself.
Thanks, Jim. Good morning, everyone. It's a great turnout today for Dr. DeCarlo. It's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Christopher DeCarlo. First of all, although I want to give a big thanks to Andrew Hallett. He's a member of my committee for helping to arrange this talk. Thanks very much, Andrew. Now, a few words about Dr. DeCarlo, or Chris, as he says I may call him. Chris has a very impressive bio. Philosopher, educator, author, principal and founder of Critical Thinking Solutions, ethics chair for the Canadian Mental Health Association, lifetime member of Humanist Canada, past visiting research scholar at Harvard. Chris currently teaches at Ryerson. Actually, he told me he has a very new, very topical course starting later this month called Bioethics in the Age of COVID. Chris has authored several books, all with very interesting and provocative titles. How to Become a Really Good Pain in the Ass. So You Think You Can Think, or Tools for Having Intelligent Discussions and Getting Along. And his latest book, he's working on it right now, it'll be out in the summer, How to Talk to a Conspiracy Theorist, a field guide. This morning, Chris will speak to us about critical thinking in a post-truth world, or how to differentiate, how to decide between what is legitimate news and what is fake news. And we all know there are lots of fake stories out there. In fact, if you were listening yesterday, our new American president, Joe Biden, talked about it at his inauguration. He talked about a culture where facts are often manipulated and sometimes even manufactured. He called it manufactured or made up. So it's very timely that we have Chris with us here this morning to help us better to get better, to be able to get better at spotting these lies when they show up. One fake story I'll share with you, I heard it recently. It was reported by the BBC. I thought it was pretty creative. It was a blatant attempt by a government, not an individual, by a government to sway public opinion. Seemingly, a video was posted online by the Ethiopian government, appearing to show one of their jets being fired on and shot down by rebels, the Tigray rebels in the north of Ethiopia. The aim of the video, of course, was to cast the rebels in a poor light. It was a complete fake. Apparently, the footage was taken from a war game video, a game called Arma. For those of you who play war games, you'll know it. My son-in-law, I found out, has actually heard of this game. He's a video game fanatic, by the way. Anyway, the original clip of the video, believe it or not, was first discovered, was first seen on a Japanese YouTube channel. That's where people cottoned onto it. That's pretty bad. Now, it's time to go over to Dr. DeCarlo, Chris, to learn about critical thinking in a post-truth world. Chris?
Thank you, Kevin. I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see that okay? Good stuff. Okay, so I'm going to talk about critical thinking in a post-truth world of alternative facts. This hopefully will be the last time I give this actual talk. You'll see why. So I have this book out now. It's called what it is because, you know, there really are better and worse ways to think about things. And it really is possible to have heated discussions, right? You can disagree entirely and still be able to get along. We noticed a few years ago, the world was changing a bit, you know, with Brexit and this gentleman. It had gotten to the point where Oxford Dictionary's word of the year for 2016 was post-truth. And let's face it, this is an extremely sad commentary on how information is delivered and interpreted and acted upon. By repeatedly stating, you know, talking points, even if it involves false information, some people feel, you know, that feelings, whatever they felt, was appropriate to make their point. This still seems to be the case throughout the world. And this is done through the use of excessive echo chambers, a media term that indicates essentially the uncritical way in which unchecked information and largely untrue information can be repeatedly stated over and over and over again until it appears to be factual. It's what Stephen Colbert refers to as truthiness, you know, truth that comes from the gut rather than books, or preferring concepts or facts one wishes to be true rather than those that are known to be true. And in many cases, the false information, it gets treated as factual. Why? Because it's repeated over and over and over again, and it gets into the mindset of the public, and they say, oh, I heard that somewhere. That must be true. The problem with this is it's hauntingly similar, you know, to what Goebbels said, you know, the Reich Minister of Propaganda, right? If you tell a lie big enough, you keep repeating it, people eventually come to believe it. It can be maintained only for such a time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, and or military consequences of the lie. It becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its powers to repress dissent, for the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus by extension, the truth is the greatest enemy of the state. Now, once fake news becomes accepted as factual, it feeds on people's confirmation bias. You know, the idea that we tend to favor information that confirms our already established biases. And then this becomes entrenched in the minds of people who really want to believe it to be true. However, in attempting to respond to this information and to maybe correct the falsities, those who do fact checks of various types of claims often come under attack as belonging to a grander conspiracy who are trying to suppress the truth. Post-truth politics makes considerable use of conspiracy theories. To further criticize these theories, basically is, to use things like facts, inconvenient things like facts, is to be a member of the mainstream media or some other group of the establishment. In critical thinking, this is called insulating one's argument against criticism. It's an attempt to make claims impervious to scrutiny and criticism. And we really can't have that, neither in critical thinking nor in society. In order to live in free and just societies, all information is open to criticism and scrutiny without exception. And so it's time to make critical thinking sexy again. Now, it's quite unfortunate. It's become fashionable over the last 4 years to claim that what people feel about issues should be taken as seriously as, say, the facts about issues. And that's not to say emotional attachment to specific viewpoints and the facts, these are two separate things. You can have feelings, you can have strong emotional attachments. That's not an issue. But our feelings should only be validated up and until the point where they conflict with the facts. Now, something really interesting happened 4 years ago, and you'll probably remember this. At Mr. Trump's inauguration, now I'm going to mention Mr. Trump from time to time, and if you support him, that's your call. That's not my issue. All I'm going to present to you are descriptive details of what happened over the last 4 years. I am perfectly neutral in any kind of determinations. But you might remember after Mr. Trump's inauguration, he said it was the largest turnout of a crowd of any inauguration of any president. But the pictures seem to show otherwise. And then do you remember Mr. Spicer came on and basically said it was the biggest turnout in history. And when questioned on CNN, Kellyanne Conway said, well, these are alternative facts that what appeared as one way is interpreted in another way. And the anchor of CNN tried to hold her to task and say, what are you talking about? So this became a term, this notion of alternative facts. And it's a very scary thing because there are only facts. There's no such thing as alternative. Alternative to a fact is a non-fact. It's just that simple. For the record, we define facts, right? Things or information statements. They're demonstrated to be true and often by appeals to evidence. Opinions, on the other hand, those are your personal judgments. That's about something or information which is not necessarily based on fact, knowledge, proof, or certainty. It can just basically be what a person happens to feel. Now, I was pleased to see the New York Times tested people's ability to determine if they could know what facts were. So they put out these bogus things here. Billionaire businessman kicks black family out of public housing back in January 2017. Well, that's the Obamas, right? So it's a joke. Michelle Obama's mother refuses to leave the White House, claims the White House is her reparations. So this is basically testing people, to know if it's a joke or not, if it's real or not. And you can go to their site and you can take a test. You can actually, they'll give you examples. Is this an opinion or is this fact? And it was, at least they're doing something about it. Love or hate the New York Times, at least they know that this was an issue, that this is a problem. And of course, there was a study distinguishing between factual and opinion statements in the news. And what it found was those who are politically aware or savvy, digitally savvy, more trusting of the news media tend to fare better. And there's no real distinction in this regard between Republicans and Democrats. The idea that we can talk about the notion of, better ways of thinking, using critical thinking about things implies that we have value to our beliefs, doesn't it? To our ideas, to our opinions, and that some ideas are better than others. But what makes an idea better, right? What makes these objects of the mind and influences of behavior good or bad or better or worse? And who measures them and how do you measure them? Luckily, much of this work has been done for us throughout history by philosophers and mathematicians and logicians and scientists and writers and many others who have developed the critical thinking skills that require all of us to make such valued distinctions. So I've taken these skills and I've distilled them into 6 steps, as it were. And it's by no means an accident that each of these steps or skills corresponds to the first 6 letters of the English alphabet. So I took all of the critical thinking skills that I thought were important, and I put them into a kind of a mnemonic that people can remember throughout my books. These are the important tools within the critical thinking skill set, as it were. A is for argument, B is for bias, C is for context, D is for diagram, E is for evidence, and F is for fallacies. And in this way, it's a handy mnemonic for memory. If you remember these letters, it's easier to remember and apply these basic steps to becoming, better thinkers, more responsible thinkers. And so they form a skill set which allows anyone a greater capacity to have more meaningful discussions about all issues, from the simple to the sublime. And the skill set empowers us in how to think. What you think, that's up to you. That's not my job. It's not my job to tell people what to think. I'm much more interested in the idea of teaching people how to think about the information that they receive. And so in my book, I go through these one at a time. And the big takeaway here is, if people use these critical thinking skills fairly, what happens is we become more empowered to have these important discussions. We can disagree and we can still get along. And we've lost the art of disagreement, what C.S. Lewis called the art of disagreement. We don't know how to disagree anymore, or it seems like people are generally yelling past each other. And I've been trying very, very hard to get this back into the school systems, because I really do believe that learning these types of skills will allow us to value discourse over hatred and dialogue over violence, and most importantly, fairness and understanding in our disagreement on important issues. And so that's why I've said the concept of fairness is actually the golden rule of dialogue, or what we might call the cornerstone of critical thinking. Because if we play fairly and others with whom we disagree play fairly, you can almost be guaranteed that both sides will get more of what they want. But, and this is a very big but, both sides must agree to play fairly according to these rules, according to the rules of logic and critical thinking. If this were done more often, it would save untold amounts of time and energy and money. But humans can be greedy. We can be self-centered. We can be stupid. And in so doing, we can decide not to play fairly. There are a few values humans place higher value upon than fairness. We have literally built-in fairness detectors inside of us. And when it comes to decisions and judgments, we tend to dispute results less if we believe that they were arrived at in a fair and just manner. So if we can be fair, even when we're disagreeing, it will increase our capacity for understanding differences of opinions. And in a world where disagreements are going to happen, we need to relearn how to have important discussions, which may become emotionally heated, but also realize that we can and should still be able to get along. You believe in God, she doesn't. You believe the Republican or conservative political philosophy is superior, he thinks the Democrats or the liberals know better. You like the Red Sox, she likes the Blue Jays. You're pro-life, she's pro-choice. I say tomato, my wife says be quiet. So the big takeaway here is that we need to relearn how to disagree and still get along. And this requires maturity. It requires diplomacy, but above all, it requires a sense of fairness. And in what I call today's age of immediacy, where information and opinions are just a click away, there seems to be less and less time in which to practice these skills. And perhaps this is one of the reasons why so many people are feeling their way through issues rather than critically thinking about them. Now, in what I've called an alternate Trump universe for the last 4 years, with alternative facts, post-truth politics, there seemed to be a greater need for clarity of thought and empowerment in the presentation of ideas and directness in communication. People need to know not only when they're being lied to or presented with alternative facts or double spoken to in a hauntingly similar manner to that found in Orwell's 1984, people need to be able to call it what it is, bullshit. And they need to be able to understand the nuances and the qualities of such statements in order to hold others accountable for their beliefs and their actions. Now, in ancient Greece, there were a group of philosophers called the Sophists. And these were well-educated men. They would travel through various cities, and they would be able to entertain audiences and demonstrate to crowds that they could argue the worst case and make it sound more convincing. They would brag that they could make the worst case sound the better. And the reason they could do this is because they twisted logic, essentially, right? And they used rhetoric, and they preyed on fear and other human emotions in order to convince people that the argument that seemed weaker at first was actually the stronger argument. And they were quite proud that they were able to do this. But one gentleman noticed that this was absolute BS, and he decided to put an end to it. And luckily for history, we had Aristotle. And he decided there had to be some kind of foundational logic that could cut through this kind of bamboosery and hucksterism, right? Which defied soundness and reasoning and consistency. And so he developed some basic principles of logic known as the 3 laws of thought of classical logic. And these are the very foundations that lie behind the criterion of consistency. And consistency is super important to how we reason every day and to how we have conversations every day. And consistency is based on 3 laws of logic. The first is what's known as the law of identity. It's like X equals X, right? Where you get the same on the left as you do on the right. The truth of this law becomes apparent whenever someone tries to make statements like a car is not a car, or a grizzly bear is a paper airplane. That violates the law of identity. And when you do that, when you violate this law, it reveals an inconsistency. And sometimes that can be very dangerous. So don't try to fold up and fly a grizzly bear. It's not going to work. So here is what the law of identity looks like in examples, right? Raymond is completely bald. Is it the same as saying Raymond has no hair? Canada has witnessed peace for over 50 years. Canada has not been at war for over half a century. The current temperature is 32 degrees Fahrenheit, or it's 0 degrees Celsius. So it's an equation. Whatever is on the left is equivalent, but maybe stated differently on the right. And this provides us with a basis of understanding of what things are by how they're defined, as well as how they're distinguished from other things. So it allows us to provide order and consistency in our world. Just imagine if in a world, people and statements and objects randomly changed properties and functions. So for example, if you tried to drive your car, you try to get into your car one day and it turned into a 10-foot banana, right? Or on some days it rained water, and on other days it rained Skittles. That would be an interesting day, but very unpredictable and very unsettling. Or what if gravity randomly just reversed its pull whenever it decided to do that? I mean, it would be a bizarre world. Neither you or me or anyone else, any species for that matter on this planet, would be able to predict and exercise any kind of control over their environments. So I think we should be a little more thankful to Aristotle for establishing some of these anchors in consistency. The next law is the law of non-contradiction, and it basically says that a state of being or a statement and their negation together cannot be true. So what that means is, it's impossible for an object, to be entirely white and entirely black at the same time and in the same respect. It's simply It's contradictory to believe that or to even state that. I can't both be sitting now and standing up at the same time, right? So a statement as well cannot be simultaneously true and false. You can't say the Toronto Blue Jays won the 1993 World Series and they lost it, right? It's a contradictory statement. It's like saying you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can have one, you can have the other, but you can't have both simultaneously. And so violating this non-contradiction law is a kind of a built-in human capacity. So Aristotle was very adept at saying, this is at the basis of why when we see something or hear something or read something or are told something, and we know it's contradictory, we now have the tools to be able to call people out. And the final law he talked about was that of excluded middle. Literally, there's no middle. This is kind of binary, zeros and one here. It's either true or false that you can walk 500 miles in a single day, or you can't. And, you know, it's like saying there's no such thing as being a little bit pregnant, right? So it's a disjunctive. It's binary. It states that either something is in a state of being or it is not. The door is either open or it's closed. Yeah, but it's almost closed. Fine. It's either almost closed or it's not. Now, these are foundational laws of classical logic. Some of you will already be saying, DeCarlo, but there are different other forms of logic. There's modal logic. There are different ways. We're not going to get into that because we don't need to get into that. This form of logic underlies the criterion of consistency. I could show you Mr. Trump at his inconsistent best, basically when he was debating Hillary Clinton back in 2016. He would say something and then the video just shows him saying the opposite. Then he says something else, and then he says the exact opposite. So we don't need to go through all that. Just suffice to say that he can be very inconsistent. What bothers us about inconsistency is trust. We're not sure we can trust people who are inconsistent because we don't know where to put our beliefs. We don't know, where to hang our ideals because the goalposts keep shifting, as it were. So it's very unsettling for those of you who aren't huge fans of Mr. Trump. Perhaps the heart of what it was disturbing you most about his behavior is that he acted so inconsistently. You might even say he was consistent in that type of activity. But, there are, of course, various examples of this. You might remember during his inauguration, we just saw Joe Biden's yesterday. He mentioned the size of the crowds, but he also said it, it looked like it was going to rain, but God didn't allow that. He opened up the skies and it didn't rain. Well, if it didn't rain, what's going on here? To even say something like that, these are things that never happen. But Trump is a very good marketer. You have to hand it to him. I mean, he knows how to run that brand, that kind of Trump brand. So if you just keep telling the same thing over and over again, it didn't rain, it didn't rain, it didn't rain at my inauguration. If you keep saying that over and over and over again, then over time, people might just remember, oh no, I don't remember it raining at the inauguration. So he's a very good marketer. And the problem with that is we don't like being lied to. We don't like seeing inconsistencies. We get nervous about that. And even though we saw a peaceful transition of power here, many people probably felt the way I think Michelle Obama felt. It can pretty much be summed up in her stare. You see Biden and Chuck Schumer and other people there congratulating Trump. I remember at the time, whether you were for in favor of the man or not in favor of the man, I remember so many of my liberal friends saying, oh, this is a travesty. We have to do anything we can to stop this. And I was like, he won. Like, what are you going to do? Like, let's move on. He's the president. We got 4 years of this. Let's make the best of this. We got to move forward here. I mean, whether Russia interfered or whatnot, yeah, sure, let's look into that. But he's the president and the country has to get going. And, as much as, it might have pained people with that look of Michelle Obama, so many others were probably feeling more like this. The fact of the matter is, he won. And as such, we have to accept that. We have to be mature enough to accept that and move on, just as people now do with Mr. Biden. And so, as I mentioned earlier, agreeing and getting along, that's easy. Disagreeing and getting along, that requires the continued and consistent use of critical thinking skills. But this takes time and it takes practice. So all I'm going to do today is just run through just a couple of them, and in a very cursory manner to show you the importance of some of these skills. So if we looked at A is for argument, what is an argument, right? We need to establish what it is each other is saying in the best possible light. And, in other words, what are you saying? What do you believe and why do you believe that? That's essentially what an argument is. And what I've done is I've broken it down and described it essentially by using an analogy of a house. When it comes to an argument, whatever it is you believe, think of a house, okay? Your conclusion, what you believe, Donald Trump was the greatest president in United States history. If that's your conclusion, we'll call that's your roof, okay? Now you want to support that. You want to support your belief. Oh, let's not pick on Mr. Trump anymore. Let's say, Justin Trudeau is the greatest prime minister in Canadian history. Some of you will not agree with that. Some of you will agree with that. Let's say that's your belief. Justin Trudeau is the greatest prime minister in Canadian history. So that's your roof. Now you want your roof to be supported by really strong walls, right? Those walls are your reasons in support of that roof. Why would you believe Justin Trudeau is the greatest prime minister? Well, he's an eloquent speaker, right? He's the son of Pierre Trudeau and learned from his father. He holds the ideals of Canada true to and close to his chest, and he's a proud Canadian. Whatever your reasons are, those are what we call your premises. And if they're strong, they support your roof. Right? Now, those premises have to rest on a foundation. And that foundation is made up of what we just looked at: consistency, the 3 laws of thought; relevance, your premises have to be relevant. You can't just say anything. Preferably simple, meaning to use Occam's razor. If you can say more with less, that's usually the favored way to go, although not always. Some arguments are very complex. Your premises should be reliable, obtained from reliable sources. And they should be sufficient. In other words, there should be enough of them. And so if we satisfy those foundational criteria, if our premises satisfy those, then we can say that we've supported our roof. Now, we may disagree with those premises. We may disagree with the person's conclusion. But if that's the case, we have to look at to what extent they satisfy or fail to satisfy these foundational criteria. That's as simple as critical thinking is. That's it in a nutshell in terms of, what an argument is and how we can have discussions. So the next time you have a discussion with somebody, cut right to the chase. What's your overall, what should I take away here? What's your conclusion? Oh, okay. What are your reasons for believing that? And why should I believe them? That's essentially how we have intelligent conversations. And we've lost our way. We don't teach this anymore in schools. And that's an unfortunate event. Now, so here's what our house looks like with our conclusion on the top. We support that with solid premises, which rest on a solid foundation of bedrock of those 5 criteria. And if we argue well, and don't forget, as a professor, I have to mark papers about ideas where I will wholly disagree with the person's conclusion, whatever it happens to be. Does that mean they get an F because I happen to, I don't agree with that? No, you get an F. No. It's how well you put your ideas together. Have you done research? Do you have reliable sources? Have you presented your ideas in a consistent manner? Do you have enough premises to support that? Remember Carl Sagan's, what I call the Carl Sagan principle: extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So if your conclusion is Elvis Presley isn't dead, he was abducted by aliens, you better have some pretty good premises to support that, right? If you're a conspiracy theorist, right, you better have some pretty good premises, because so many conspiracy theories don't. And what happens is they can't satisfy those foundational criteria. Their premises are weakened. We can demonstrate how they are weak, and their conclusion collapses. And a lot of people are angry that this can be shown, especially conspiracy theorists. In the book I'm writing now, the most difficult thing we have to do with conspiracy theorists is tell them that this is okay, that you thought you had this, but this is actually what your argument looks like. And that's okay. How many times have we believed in things only to realize we were wrong? We've got to get over the problem of thinking that being right all the time is what we are. We're not right all the time. And in learning that we might have been mistaken, this is how education moves forward. Now, spoiler alert, gentlemen, I hope you're all fairly familiar with the idea that Santa Claus doesn't actually exist, but there might have been a time in your lives when you thought Santa Claus did exist. And then you found out, no, there's not really good support for that. This is kind of like a rite of passage for kids. They now can, like the phoenix from the ashes, you can build anew, you can build your argument anew. And this has become the greatest challenge for me in critical thinking, is trying to get people to realize giving up the ghost, as it were, giving up your beliefs that might not have been well argued or well substantiated is not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. Some of you will remember Kyrie Irving, great NBA basketball player. He was a flat earther. He believed the earth is flat. And teachers would come up to him, high school and grade school teachers, and they would say, "You're not making our job easier, And so he looked into his belief, and he is now a reformed flat earther. He has now come out and said, "No, of course I was wrong. I followed some information online, and I went down a YouTube rabbit hole, and I started looking at more and more information that seemed like it was true." And there's tons of information out there. They're very polished documentaries that would make the average person think, hang on, this is interesting. But Kyrie Irving is a reformed flat earther. He gave up his idea. He thought he was onto something solid. He realized he was wrong. People like Kyrie Irving need to be applauded when they walk into a room. We need to give them great applause, and to give others the idea that it's okay to give up your views. You don't have to hang on to these ideas. And so the second thing we'll look at is the idea of biases. And this is really important, right? If we disagree with each other, usually it's we've gotten there because of what our biases are, right? Why would somebody favor a political candidate over another political candidate? To some of us, we just can't understand why they would vote for a particular individual, or listen to a particular musician, or like certain type of art, or favor a particular type of athlete or a team. Whether it's the Toronto Maple Leafs or the Montreal Canadiens. I mean, we could have this, discussion all day, but it generally comes down to our biases, and we have to consider what biases are involved on both sides of an issue. And I mentioned quite a few of these in my books, and generally they're broken down into two types, right? We're all biologically biased, gentlemen. We're a product of our genetics and what's called epigenetics. Our neuropsychological influences, our age, our health, even our sex determines in many ways how we look at information and how we interpret it, and how we respond and act on that. And of course, there are cultural constraints, right? How we were raised, who our friends are we religious or non-religious? Where do we get our information? What forms of media? Do we just watch CNN? Do we just watch Fox News, MSNBC, Al Jazeera? Do we go online and find other types of sources, Snopes and other forms? So these are the ways in which we are going. Every human on this planet is biased. There's no such person as an unbiased individual. For that matter, there's no such information that has not gone through some form of filtration. It's just the nature of the world. It's just who we are. We can't get away from that, but we can keep our biases in check. We can look into the mirror and we can say, why do I think this right now? Why am I anti-abortion or pro-life or pro-choice or for the death penalty or against the death penalty or pro-gun or anti-gun or any of the most important issues in the world? Whatever your opinions are, whatever your beliefs are about those, look into the mirror and go through these constraints, these biases, and ask yourself, could I have believed the opposite if I were raised in a different part of the world or at a different time, or my family was of a different political frame of mind? Yes, the answer is we could have. So we need to be able to realize how important biases are in determining human opinions. Now let's just look at, say, education, for example, right? We go around the world, we look at the way in which people are educated. If we all grew up in rural Pakistan, then, you know, only the gentlemen, only the guys would be educated, and it would come largely from the Quran. There is no other book you really need to know for that particular part of the world. In other parts of the world, I've worked with past education ministers to introduce pilot projects of getting critical thinking into the high school system. In Ontario, it met with some success, and now I'm trying to meet with Mr. Lecce to continue the conversation and to get it into our school systems. Critical thinking is not taught in our schools. Teachers will say it's part of their curriculum, but not everyone is doing it, and that's unfortunate. Critical thinking is universal. The skills I discussed earlier, the 6 different steps, are universal. I didn't make these up. They're used everywhere. They're logic. It's like talking about mathematics. I'm hoping that I can continue the conversation with Mr. Lecce, because believe it or not, we're already in the midst of planning our next book after the conspiracy theory book, and it will be critical thinking for children, like toddlers to tweens, because we believe that's where critical thinking should be taught earliest, and that's where it's at its most important. If you want to reduce misinformation and conspiratorial thinking, you got to get to children when they're young and train them to be, you know, critical about information, not just to accept anything, to understand the importance of things like biases, and that they have the capacity, the empowerment to be able to make distinctions about information. And we need to teach that earlier on, especially in the age of immediacy, where the internet is ubiquitous and it is available to everyone. So that ties in with the idea of media literacy, or knowing what information is more valuable to other forms of information. Now, I've taught online throughout the world various forms of critical thinking in China, Nigeria, Ghana, Rwanda, visited Guatemala. I've taught critical thinking internationally, and in 2007, I was invited to Ireland to meet with President Michael Higgins, who is a huge champion of education and very much applauded the work we were doing in Canada and throughout the world. This guy is a champion of having philosophy and critical thinking taught in the high schools, and they do. And I am so impressed with their education system in Ireland. And I'm so hopeful that we can get something more along the lines here in Canada. Because I really do think, you know, we assume that students know how to think. They don't. They don't. You need to be taught how to think. There are better and worse ways, and those involve the skills of critical thinking. And so the purpose of my talk here today was simple. I mean, really to discuss these critical thinking tools, which allow us to gain greater clarity of thought and be more responsible in what we think, to think better essentially, about important issues. And it's through the fair and competent use of these skills that we can better understand, how to have these intelligent discussions, how we can disagree and get along and not hate the other individual, right? Our successful use of these skills is going to require considerable time, and it's going to require practice, but that's to be expected because critical thinking is not easy. A lot of people think, oh, it's just a quick fix. No, it's like learning a language. You have to learn it, then you have to practice it, then it becomes a part of who you are. Critical thinking isn't just something you do. It's what you live. It defines you and it changes your life. The better a critical thinker you are, the more empowered you are about the information you receive on a daily basis. And it's not easy because it requires us to embrace the concept of fairness in its application. But if we truly value the ideas, the concepts of freedom of thought and freedom of expression and the free interplay and exchange of ideas in the marketplace of ideas, then we have to do so through the continued practice and use of these types of critical thinking skills. And I think in such a manner, we can look to the future with the hope that civil and political discourse will regain its rightful place in the marketplace of ideas. And we can once again acknowledge and appreciate the importance of truth and facts, which will hopefully make conversations great again. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Chris is open to some questions from the members. If you raise your hand, we'll recognize you for your question. And when you recognize, you'll have to turn yourself off mute, which I hopefully I am. And so here we go. Are you with us, Gary?
Yes, I am, Jim, and you were off mute. Ken, you've got a question, go for it. You have to unmute yourself.
Okay, I'm on unmute. Listening to the U.S. inauguration, there was a dramatic change in the way words are used, and as you've so effectively illustrated, Dr. DeCarlo, Trump's words seem to be negative and meant to inflame feelings. There's no room for discussion. Either you're right, or you agree, or you're wrong. And Biden's words seem to focus on uniting and listening to views. So my question is, do you have hope that the American dialogue will in fact change for the better? And if so, do you think it'll be achieved during Biden's presidency?
Great question, Ken. We are hopeful, right? Everyone is hopeful that we can return to a more civilized form of discourse where ideas can be presented more clearly, and the values behind those ideas can be fleshed out. I am hopeful. I'm cautiously optimistic. If you want to see the antithesis of critical thinking, just play the first debate between Trump and Biden. Do you remember that? It was unfair. The poor moderator couldn't control them. There was no real interplay and exchange of ideas in a kind of a courteous manner. That's what we need to return to. And I hope we can see that trickle down throughout, say, the rest of the world as well, because, the US isn't the only country that has had an individual who is kind of anti-science, anti-logic, anti-critical thinking. You look at Bolsonaro in Brazil and other countries throughout the world, we still have a long way to go in terms of what to accept as fact and how we should act on those facts. But a very good question, Ken.
Ken Medlin, your question? Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Very good talk, Doctor. Question I have, though, is Mr. Trump, the facts are that he achieved approximately 50% of the popular vote.
Mm-hmm.
How much an influencer is he going to continue to be in the next 4 years?
That's a great question. And, you know, he should have the freedom, by the way, to be an influencer, and unless he is deliberately spreading falsehoods. I believe we may see a schism in the Republican Party. And this happens. This is a normal, natural progression for any state of politics. It happened with the Conservative Party here in Canada. We might see it happen where Mitt Romney and that group will go one way and Trump and his followers will go another way. Time will tell. It's very early days right now. I don't know if Mr. Trump ever thought he was going to win that election. I thought his part to play was always as kind of an agitator, always kind of somebody in the wings who would kind of throw shade at various types of ideas. He's a very good muckraker, and he knows how to get under people's skin very effectively. But he won, and then he had to become president. And I think he really didn't anticipate having to do that, and so I think it surprised him and others as well. But he's going to hang in there, and whether he creates his own party and all of his followers go one way, I'm not sure. And please keep in mind, folks, that yeah, he got 74 million votes, but that doesn't mean those who voted for him are in favor of him per se. If once a Republican, always a Republican. So in the States, or voting just for the incumbent, if we just look at the numbers, that doesn't mean those who voted for Mr. Trump were in favor of his, say, foreign policies or domestic policies or whatever. But nonetheless, he does have a very strong following. He has what we might call a cult of personality. You know, he's larger than life, and he's out there, and people look to him as being a very charismatic type of person. So that enters into the psychology of politics, but that's a different matter. But good question.
Next question. Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, thank you for those comments about Trump. They sort of, echo my own, that he didn't think he really could win, but it was sort of fun to do it. And, it was certainly increasing his publicity. I was listening to what you were saying about fairness and making sure that, everybody sort of really expresses what is really behind what they're thinking and proposing. And the thing which keeps striking me about all this at the moment is hidden agendas. How do you teach people to recognize that they have hidden agendas?
Yeah, that's a great question. So whether they're hidden agendas or assumptions, whatever we call them in philosophy, presuppositions, it's difficult. It's kind of like, the phrase is a Mexican standoff, three guys with guns pointing at three different people. Who's going to shoot first or not shoot first? Fairness is a tricky thing. When Obama took office in 2008, he did what I thought was a fair move, which was he sought to reach out to the Republicans for help. And I don't think they were particularly keen on helping him too much. When you open yourself up too much, if the other side is particularly predacious, they will see that as a weakness and they will attack. You can bet Donald Trump would do this. Dollars, donuts. I mean, he would do this. That's the type of person he is. That's how he was raised, and that's how he was biased. So it depends on the individuals and to what extent they are capable of being intellectually mature enough to understand that the more fair they cooperate in using the critical thinking skills, the more everybody is going to gain. It's sort of like driving on the 401 during rush hour. if every person stayed 2 car lengths behind the person in front of them, drove exactly the same speed, matched the speed, and never changed lanes, every person would get to where they wanted to go faster than by individually trying to get there quicker than the next person. So cooperation and fairness would cause the flow of traffic to move much quicker. I've actually met with the Ministry of Transportation to express these ideas. But that requires cooperation, that requires fairness. That's the biggest hurdle. So Chris, your question is very to the point and a very good one. It's in convincing people that if we do play by these rules, we're both going to get more of what we want. If we try to go it alone, maybe one of us wins to the detriment of the other. Maybe we don't. And maybe it just causes time to drag and more money to be spent and more energy to be wasted, only to get less of what both sides wanted in the end. So, right, we're a quirky bunch. It's difficult for us to be able to want to give that up, to be vulnerable to the point where we're willing to let the other side know what our vulnerabilities are so that we can both gain. There's a lot of work. John Nash, do you ever see a movie, A Beautiful Mind? The Princeton.
Yes.
So he developed algorithms, and he developed what's called the prisoner's dilemma, the idea that if we cooperate, everybody's gonna do better. And if we try to go it alone, maybe one side succeeds to the detriment of the other, or they don't. They are both pulled down to almost a zero-sum game. But Chris, an excellent question. I wish I had an easy answer. I'm sorry, I don't.
We've got time for
Thank
one
you.
more.
Thank you for your thoughts. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
One more question.
Jim, I'm not seeing any hands, so I think,
There's a Chris, I think.
is it Chris?
Ken had his hand up.
Sorry, Chris, you have your hand up?
Actually, on my iPad, the mute switch is at the top.
Okay.
So I was just up there.
I think Ken has a question.
Yes.
There we go.
Yes, Doctor. Just a question. We talk about cooperation and being fair, et cetera, but our whole society is raised on being competitive, right from the school system, where we get marked and we get judged and get positioned as location in a class, and the marks, and school and business is all competition.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure how, it's like a double-edged sword almost. What you're saying is right, I think, but how do you get it when we're taught to be the other way?
That's an excellent question. And competition isn't a bad thing. Competition is good. Competition is what makes us better. It's what makes economies work. It's what allows us to improve. What we need to let young children know is competition is a good thing. There are going to be winners and losers in competition. We cannot win at everything. We're not going to be the best at everything, but we're going to be good at some things and not so good at other things. I tell my students, if I take you all to a football field and line you up at one end zone and we have a 100-meter dash to the next, do you think we're all going to cross that finish line at exactly the same time? This is how a lot of ridiculous political policies want to try to, as Steven Pinker says, hammer all the nails and make them all even. That's ridiculous. We're never going to do that. We are not all equal. Okay, we're just not all equal. Some of us are going to be better than others, but we can strive to be better. When I coach kids in basketball, they're not all going to be the same. They're just not. Some are going to be better. Some are going to go on and play at a much higher level. You can see it like by the age of 7, by the age of 8, you can just see the natural talent in it. Well, that's a product of their biases. That's a product of their genes. That's a product of their environment. That's a product of a lot of different things. We can't make everything just all right for everybody. So fairness in competition is very, very important. That's why in this last presidential election, What bothers people is many Americans thought it was unfair, that Trump really won and that it was stolen and that it was done in an unfair manner. The problem is, when you demonstrate the fairness, some people aren't willing to accept that. They don't like that version of fairness. There's something underhanded about that level of fairness. So the tricky part is making sure we get to term, we understand the terms of what fairness means, and then allow competition to naturally take part within that context of fairness. And there are going to be winners and losers. We have to teach people how to lose and how to lose gracefully. Take it and then use it as an aspect to better yourself. Like, you think Michael Jordan became such a great basketball player by, giving up after he lost in a particular game or missed a shot? No, it's through losing. It's through trial and error and understanding our lot in life that there is going to be competition. That's what makes us stronger. But if we can house that within a fair environment, then I think we've done due diligence to our next generation of civilians who are up and coming. But again,
Good answer. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, on behalf of all of our members today, Dr. DeCarlo, I want to thank you for your thought-provoking and most timely discussion. You remind us to continue to be vigilant when we live in such an instant gratification age. Thanks for your presentation, and perhaps you can come back and give us a presentation of your new book when it's published.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd appreciate that.
You're welcome to excuse yourself from the meeting anytime. Thank you.
Take care.
As we close this January meeting, I also wish to thank those of you that came out today to this meeting. This is, I think, the most we've had, or second most, to any of our Zoom meetings. And I also want to thank our Zoom masters who continue to make it possible every month, and for our executive meetings too. I also want to, at this time, extend our collective appreciation to those frontline workers, especially in the healthcare sector, for their tireless and brave work in protecting our health and for looking after those who may be ill, no matter the cause. Please stay safe until we meet again. Remember that this session has been recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube by Bob Lalonde within a couple of days, and you'll be notified of when it's up, and you can have your spouses or friends tune in to listen and watch Dr. DeCarlo. We're now going to be moving into breakout sessions after the close, and I encourage every one of you to remain for this. The speaker for our next meeting on Thursday, February 18th, will be Dr. David Galbraith from the Royal Botanical Gardens. The formal part of this meeting is now terminated.